Here we go. It's another edition of the WTOP Huddle. I'm Dave Johnson with Rob Woodfork, Chris Cichon, George Wallace, Dave Preston, getting the gang all together. And of course, as we get together, some sad news today. An NFL coaching legend and also former player in pro football, Marty Schottenheimer, passing away at the age of 77. And of course, right away, that resonates with us in D.C. because Schottenheimer had the one season with the Washington football team back in 2001. And it reminds us a little bit also of what we're going through now. There's a connection. When Washington hires a coach like Ron Rivera, you believe, all right, this is the way forward and finally some stability. If you remember, guys, when Marty Schottenheimer was brought in, we had already had Deion Sanders and the burgundy suit and there was all kinds of chaos. But when Marty Schottenheimer was brought in, you thought, all right, this could be a turning point. You literally had a guy, Marty Schottenheimer, who after his job with the Chiefs had criticized Dan Snyder. I believe his quote was he would never work for a Dan Snyder. And then all of a sudden he gets hired. And there really was a feeling in this town, now we'll get going in the right direction with the Washington football team. And with all the credentials and cred that Marty Schottenheimer had, he didn't want to stay here. He only lasted a season and went 8-8, and he was gone after the 2001 season. Of course, went on to success with the San Diego Chargers. So it kind of, as I thought about it today, it gives us hope that really the Washington football team is this time on the right course with Ron Rivera, Martin Mayhew, and everybody else involved, because we've been through false dawns before in this town. And Marty Schottenheimer, I know, I've never made it to the Super Bowl, but again, when something like this happens, it gives a chance to look at his record and what he accomplished in 21 years. It's no accident he had success with all the teams he was with, and probably no accident he didn't have success here in Washington. Guys, any other thoughts about the loss of a legend, Marty Schottenheimer?
Well, I'll say this. George and I have talked about this in the newsroom, and I'm sure it's come up with some of you in the past, but Marty Schottenheimer is the big what if in this franchise's history, certainly the Snyder era and maybe all time, because he did have them on a very positive trajectory. And I'll explain for some of the younger fans who may be watching, because that has now been 20 years almost since that season, believe it or not. But, that season was right after 9/11, and there was a delayed start to that season. And under those tough circumstances, this first-year coach, Marty Schottenheimer, starts 0-5 and then becomes the first team. They become the first team in NFL history to then win their next 5 games. They get to 500, they finish 8-8, and they were in the playoff conversation despite that horrid start and under all of those difficult circumstances. And oh, by the way, Tony Banks was the quarterback. This was the guy that got benched in Baltimore, and then they go on to win the Super Bowl without this guy. And that's the guy that they were winning with under center. So there was just that sense that, they were on the right trajectory, they were on the right path. And if they were able to get a more reliable signal caller, that good times were coming in Washington. And I maintain this, and I know, again, George and I have talked about this. If Marty had stayed here for 5 to 10 years, I still believe that they would have won a Super Bowl here in Washington, and we would view this franchise very differently, and we would view Schottenheimer's legacy very differently. Because everybody, whenever you talk about Schottenheimer, inevitably the 5-13 playoff record comes up. And to me, I think that's not fair, because it is very hard to win a championship in this league. And too often people gloss over the 200 wins. That's hard. Only 6 other coaches have ever done it. So he had 200 wins. He got to the playoffs 13 out of 21 seasons. Everybody's looking at the 13 losses. I'm looking at the fact that he got to the playoffs almost 2 out of 3 times, he was coaching a season. So, I mean, he had one of the underrated careers. He's got an underrated coaching tree as well, because you have a couple of Hall of Famers that served under him, and Tony Dungy and Bill Cowher, and, the coaching trees that those guys have. So I think he's a legend, and I think his legend would have been larger if he would have had a full opportunity here in Washington.
No question that, again, and that sounds familiar. If only there was a quarterback in Washington, the trajectory, it sounds like history is repeating itself. For the record, and I don't mean this it shows the passion of Marty Schottenheimer. He did win a title in the United Football League with the Virginia Destroyers that were playing in Virginia Beach. And I actually called a game involving him against Sacramento. The coach of Sacramento was Dennis Green. Yeah, you know, we are who we are. Our record is what we.
They are who they thought they were.
That's right. But anyway, but I bring that up because it shows, and that was back in 2011, and it shows just the passion Marty Schottenheimer had for football. It wasn't the NFL, but he still gave it his all in different circumstances in Virginia Beach and guided them to the title. Any other thoughts on Marty Schottenheimer? George, Rob was referencing you. You guys have had discussions about this?
Yeah, and I agree with Rob. And, you know, it's talk about the what ifs. The other one you talk about just with this franchise, what if Jack Kent Cooke had left the team to his kid? But that's just a whole other story. You talk about under the Dan Snyder era. You know, and look, Schottenheimer was one of those guys. He came in, he was hard-nosed. The Oklahoma drill in training camp, nobody wanted to do it. Bruce Smith, they wanted to do this. He tried to tell Darrell Green how to return punts. But it was the veterans got on board, the young guys got on board. You know, with the Jeff George situation, you know, they started to buy in, and then Dan Snyder realized that he wasn't having any more fun. He wasn't able to control anything anymore. So they agreed to split ways. I remember his post after he left, his press conference, very classy in the press conference at the end, just like it's not going to work out. It was unfortunate. Yes, maybe you don't get Joe Gibbs part 2 here in DC if Marty stays. You definitely don't get Spurrier, that's for sure. So a lot of what ifs there, but he was definitely an old school guy, a winner. Look, he goes 14-2 and gets fired by the Chargers. Not many people can go 14-2 and get fired by a team. So I think he believed in his ways. You see all the inspirational pregame speeches he had, the way he talked to his players, and he just had that way about him. And you know, people want to run through a wall for him. They maybe didn't like it at first. But once you started buying in, you obviously saw what happened here. Kent Graham and Tony Banks, the quarterbacks at the end of that year, guys. Come on. Rod Gardner was on that team. So you never know what would have happened. You're right. But you have to give Marty a lot of credit for what he was able to do in this league and the way he got teams to play for him. And I think that's especially evident when you see the outpouring today after his death.
At least we did get Steve Spurrier. There's editing sound on Monday mornings. I love getting Spurrier quotes. We didn't win many games, but it was fun cutting sound.
That's right.
Chi, Dave, Preston, any other thoughts on this subject before we move on?
I think the Marty era serves as a cautionary tale because it was a situation that started ugly, very ugly, 0-5. He was able to turn things around, but things did not work for the precise reason why a lot of things haven't worked in the last 20 plus years. The owner likes to be in the room, and Marty didn't like having the owner in the room with him. And so that did not work. Right now, we have another coach-centric organization with Ron Rivera in charge. Let's see how he does in year 2, in year 3, when it's easy for an owner to use the phrase Jay Gruden gave us, to stay on his yacht for an extra 6 months or an extra year. But after a while, a lot of guys buy football teams because they like to be in the mix. They like to be in the press box. They like to be in the suite. They like to hold court. They like to have their fingertips in the equation. And let's see how long this current situation lasts with the coaching and the owner owning, and the twain, I guess the twain not meeting or something along those lines. And we're not saying train, we're saying twain. But and George talked about big what if. Same with Rob. My biggest what if is, what if the Skins had pulled the trigger and traded Joe Theismann for Eric Hipple after that 0-5 start back in 1981? He was going to be a Redskin, and then he had that big game on Monday Night Football, and we lost a great opportunity. Who knows?
Wow. All these references, and I usually bring up the dated references, available on Google if you want to look up some of this stuff. Younger. And full disclosure, by the way, I'm on my yacht right now. That's why I've got the virtual background. Chi, round it up. Marty, you're a football coach. We have to, again, just salute what an amazing career he had as a football coach. Again, that he would have had, I agree with all of you, it would have had success had he had a chance to stay in DC, and the story of this franchise would be different.
Yeah, absolutely. You guys have basically said all of the nice things about Coach Schottenheimer that I was going to mention. I'll just add that I'm sure that, right before his death, he was pretty proud of his son who, as a controversial coordinator, he got a lot of blame for some of the woes that the Seattle Seahawks have had with Russell Wilson under center over the past couple of years, but his son getting hired by the Jacksonville Jaguars to be the passing game coordinator with Trevor Lawrence and Urban Meyer, so couldn't have really fallen into a better opportunity there. And maybe his son ends up being a head coach somewhere. He's had some stops and has learned a lot from a lot of different guys. He was with the Rams, he was with Georgia and Mark Richt, he was with the Colts, so certainly a nice opportunity there. Oh my God. Okay.
All right, Chi, we'll let you get the first crack.
Zach Shore, our engineer, calling me mid-show, so
well,
he's
yeah, well,
sorry, Phil.
well, we just canceled his subscription to the WTOP
Yeah,
Huddle. I don't care
he's
if
done.
he's done. He's out of here. Chi, we'll let you start the post Super Bowl conversation and what it all means in your mind.
So what it means to me is that it is evident that everybody knows you need offensive tackles, right? And it's one of those things that now that sports betting, Dave, you promote this, is legal in Virginia. I wish I put my bank account on the Buccaneers, because not having either of your starting offensive tackles, along with the fact that your head coach probably not coaching with a completely clear mind, thinking about his son and the legal trouble that he's going to be in that very unfortunate situation. The Chiefs, they were not set up to win this game and hang with a Buccaneers defense that was fierce in this one. And, Tom Brady, we all know about his play and everything like that, but I took away stories of him texting guys at 11 o'clock at night, telling them we're going to win, or a guy was crying after the NFC Championship game. And he goes, "What are you crying for? We're not done." So even stuff off the field and motivating his guys, I'm just so super impressed with Brady and this Bucs team.
No, I agree with that. And also, I think the Antonio Brown story and how Tom Brady is a true leader, because he really helped Antonio Brown resurrect his life and his career and having that success in Tampa Bay. And Antonio Brown's emotional comments after the Super Bowl, what Tom Brady meant to him. So it's not just what you see on the field, but again, I think we'll go to Rob. You brought this up last week. The big concern was the offensive line. That's why every year when somebody says, how's the team going to finish? I always say 8-8, because it all depends on if the offensive line stays healthy. We can talk about all kinds of schemes and this and that, but if you don't protect the quarterback, you really don't have a chance.
Yeah. And it was a reminder, because everybody was focused on the quarterbacks going into this game. It's a reminder that the game of football is decided, it is won, and it is lost in the trenches. And that was the one sticking point that I had going into this game. I thought it would be the difference in a close game. I didn't for 1 minute think that it was going to turn into that. That was just
awful.
Unbelievable. He was literally running for his life, and he was making incredible throws that, if his receivers made a play, they might have still been in that game. There are people who are just like, oh, Mahomes isn't all that. Well, I have more respect for Mahomes, because he kept them somewhat competitive in that game. That should have been a shutout, probably, the way that was set up. But, as I wrote in my column, I said this game, even though Tom Brady established a culture that led them to this game, the game itself was won off the 2 Ds, defense and diversity. And you look at that coaching staff, and we mentioned this last week, you have all Black coordinators, you have multiple women on the staff. No other team in the NFL has that. And every one of those coaches, you saw their units had made a statement in this game. And, the Chiefs issues aside, you've got to be able to take advantage of those advantages. And they certainly did that. That was a well-coached game. That was a well-played game on the part of the Buccaneers. And I think you have to give them all credit. But tying it into Washington, I think it just kind of establishes that they need to go all in on getting themselves a quarterback. They really do. And I know that Ron Rivera has publicly said he doesn't want to give up multiple picks and wants to, what was the quote? You don't want to
mortgage your future.
Yeah. You don't want to go after what you want and then not be able to get what you need, I think is what the quote was. But I think this Tom Brady thing shows. That was a 7-9 team last year, and he was able to get guys to come here and to do so for less money. And he helped a team that didn't necessarily know how to win. This is according to Bruce Arians. He's like, we didn't know how to win. He came in and he taught us how to win. So if Washington can pull off something with Russell Wilson is a great example of that. I don't think they can move him this year, but if you can make that happen, that's the kind of thing that changes the trajectory of your franchise just like it did in Tampa Bay. And I think to a lesser extent, Deshaun Watson is that guy. So you can not like having to give up a couple of ones, but at the end of the day, I don't know that you're going to be able to get to where you want to go in the time that they realistically have to get there with Ron Rivera and this staff. I don't know that you do that, waiting around for a quarterback to literally fall in your lap.
Dave Preston, you raised your eyebrow. Go ahead.
Yes. Well, no, I think there was a brief window of opportunity for the Chiefs to win this game this past Sunday. They killed themselves with penalties in that second quarter. I think there was that interception that was disallowed because of a defensive hold, and then maybe a pass interference on the same drive that allowed them to go up 14-3. And then late first half, they gave the ball to Brady with maybe a minute or so to play in the first half, almost daring him. You don't, if you're going to come at the king, you better not miss. They came at the king, and Brady was able to give them a 21-6 halftime lead. As Rob has said, and I think it would be the consensus, the defense was the difference this past Sunday. I think 29 of 56 dropbacks. Mahomes was pressured. But what stopped Tom Brady from going 19-0 way back when? The fact that the New York Giants were able to pressure him in that Super Bowl. What is the great equalizer? Their quarterback must go down, and he must go down hard, to quote my good friend Al Davis, fellow alum of the Harvard of Central New York. But when you look at what we saw this past Sunday, I'm happy that that they were able to get through this season because there were many times that we thought that this season would get derailed. We had games on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday that didn't even belong there in the first place. I'm happy that the season's over. I'm glad that the NFL can go back to its usual business of just percolating headlines in the offseason.
All right, Chi, headlines. What does it all mean for you?
What it all means for me is that we are now going to embark on an offseason where the conversation switched to here in Washington, who's going to be our quarterback, because as we've been talking about here, Tom Brady, Patrick Mahomes, those are the two of the best. You need a quarterback under center to win in this league. And where does this organization go? I've been advocating for Mac Jones for weeks. People always shun that and say that Alabama quarterbacks and their track record in the NFL doesn't exactly spell success. But I think the world is the oyster for this Washington team. There's a lot of options they can explore. I just hope it is not giving up the farm for Deshaun Watson, as we have talked about here. But looking forward to the draft, looking to see maybe like a Justin Fields could fit here. But do we want to go Ohio State quarterback here in Washington again? I don't know. So
We've done that before.
Yeah. George?
I think you're right. I think they've got the pieces to go out and get a quarterback. Like Rob has talked about, you're not going to re-sign all these guys. I keep going back to that too, as far as using a trade piece. Russell Wilson's the latest kind of twist this week or today, that he may be unhappy in Seattle. I saw the Washington 8-1, third best odds if Russell Wilson were to leave Seattle. They were in on Stafford. Who knows how much? I really don't think they're going to be in on Wentz. I would say they'll go in on Watson. I don't think Derek Carr is going to be an option. I wouldn't go hard for Derek Carr, but they have some options out there. There's no doubt about it. And to your point about the offensive line, one other big question is going to be what they do with Brandon Sheriff, how much money he's going to warrant, and whether or not they want to pay him $17 million a year. I mean, he's good, he's injury prone, but to your point about the offensive line, so I think there are a lot of moving parts still with this team, and I think the quarterback is still very much in play. I think the way from their press conference last week that all options are on the table. He was non-committal on Alex Smith, but he did say Kyle Allen is recovering and is in the plans. I would imagine Allen, Taylor Heineke, part of a training camp battle, along with somebody else if they were able to go out. Well, maybe not a battle if they go out and get one of these other big guys, and there's your starter, obviously. But they're going to keep all options open, as they mentioned 100 times last week. It's going to be interesting to see what they're able to package and put together, because they do have some options, especially with those defensive guys. And to Dave, one other quick point. Your point, Dave, about every team we predict is going to go 8-8. That's not true. Dave Preston, somebody's going to go 5-8-3 every year in his predictions. So.
Well, and that's only because of the time change in their schedule. That's why.
Right.
That's what.
Actually, real quick to piggyback on what George was talking about with the quarterbacks. I actually heard something from someone around the league over the weekend that leads me to believe that and George will be thrilled to know that I'm starting to come off the Cam Newton thing. But
Thank God.
But I heard something that leads me to believe that they're probably going to stick with the guys that they have now if they can't draft somebody, which makes my stomach turn because I don't want to have to talk about Kyle Allen for another year. But yeah, it's starting to sound, because I mean, think about it. When you talk about the speculation of who's in the Deshaun Watson derby, do you ever hear Washington?
No.
You hear Miami, you hear the Jets. And I know they got in on Stafford, but I mean, you're not hearing them in the mix for any of these big name quarterbacks that were available, say for Stafford, but that was after the fact. You know what I mean? So it's starting to feel, I have a sneaking suspicion that they're not going to make a big quarterback move and that they're just going to go into this season status quo. And that might be the worst thing that they could do with that position.
No, and you get the impression from the comments of Ron Rivera. I mean, yeah, there's a part to being in the front office in all sports of playing your cards close to your vest, and you say all the right things. But as I was listening last week to him and Martin Mayhew talk, it clearly doesn't seem like there's a will to start making wild trades and bold moves. Yeah. All right. Any other football before we move on? And we're going to wrap this up with our 2-minute drill and go around topics that we're just going to throw out there. Any other football? Anybody want to jump on any other football before we change gears? Nope. Okay. I'll start with the Wizards. Okay. I don't know what's going to happen next with this team. It has to play defense. If it's going to have success, but this is not the time, as it's been all over social media, to fire the head coach. Firing a head coach is like a short, and you understand why fans, when you're frustrated with your team and it's not going well, you want somebody's head. Lord knows I don't want it to be the radio broadcaster's head. So you see people say, well, it's time to fire the coach. There are cases, and I pointed this out. The great example was Glenn Hanlon when he coached the Capitals, when he knew he had lost the locker room and actually went to George McPhee. And of course, eventually Bruce Boudreau was hired. I think about Wizards/Bullets history when they made the decision to fire Jim Lynam because they felt like that was a playoff team. He had lost the locker room, and as great a coach as he was, Bernie Bickerstaff comes in and they make that playoffs in '97, and Michael Jordan at the time anoints the Bullets the team of the future, as I go way back in history. But the point now with this Wizards team, they have dealt with so much. It's clear you take 2 weeks off like they've done because of the COVID protocol. It's not just a Wizards thing. The Dallas Mavericks, pretty good team, 2-8 after they had a pause. You can go right down the list. Miami Heat have struggled after a pause. So given the circumstances of this season, this is still a young team. The Russell Westbrook-John Wall trade has not worked out yet because we've not seen the Russell Westbrook that we need to see, quite frankly. So there are so many questions to this team right now. You don't need to add to that list of questions a new head coach and change things. This team needs some continuity in the worst way, and changing a head coach would not be the answer in Washington.
And also, the Wizards don't really have a track record for making in-season coaching moves. They have a tendency, historic. I know it's happened, but they have.
And that's the Lynam was an all-star break thing. So
right.
Again,
right.
But I think the reason for that is you make it. I think the only reason to do it is if you believe, all right, this is going to make a difference. This is the team. This team is definitely playoff ready, et cetera, et cetera. Yes, it is underperforming. So by that measure, you would make a change. But there's so many factors of why it is underperforming. I don't think you go and just say, well, I fired somebody and that solves it.
Yeah, that's not something you can do out of frustration. That has to be, we're better without this guy. Let's get him out now. You know what I mean? Like that's, I don't see that being the case either. Yeah.
And to your point, Dave, I mean, you got, I thought starting Bertans last night, and I saw Scott Brooks say, you want to get him going. You need the Davis Bertans from last year. And I know he's trying to work his way back too, but obviously he had 4 threes last night, I think it was, right? When he started the game. Yeah. Alex Len is still trying to, I loved Alex Len's, his comments after the game. He said, I had just been cut. I was in Atlanta. I jumped on a road trip with the Wizards, hadn't met anybody, haven't practiced. I mean, he's trying to get going, and then Westbrook sitting out these seconds of back-to-back. So lots of still moving parts. And, I know they're professionals, and you hate to say, oh, well, it's close and this and that. But you have to say this team hasn't quit. I mean, Scott Brooks says it too. You get down by 20 in first quarters, and they're always in a game in the fourth quarter. Okay, maybe not Charlotte the other night, but you haven't seen any signs of that. I mean, Dave obviously is closer to the situation, but I think you would be able to tell, right, Dave, if this team is just tuning everything out and doesn't want to be there, totally just not even close to caring at this point.
And that's when you change a coach. When all of a sudden, no matter what the coach says, it's just not resonating. And that's, that's not because players on any team are bad. It just happens or any organization. You think about your workplace watching this. At some point, sometimes you tune the general manager out. We don't, because we like our jobs and we want to stay working at WTOP. But that's the time when all right, lost the locker room. When they fired Randy Whitman at the end of the 2016 season, he brought great success. It was clear, and I think Randy knew it. He was no longer, that team should have made the playoffs and didn't. Yeah. And that was the litmus test. And it was clear that he was no longer, for whatever reasons, and it's always more than one, reaching the players. Chi, what's on your mind this week?
What's on my mind is I've been covering UVA basketball on the past couple of Saturday nights. And to me, I have a hard time believing that there are 5 or 6 teams ahead of them in the top 25. I think it's Gonzaga, Baylor, and then UVA. I mean, I know that their record isn't maybe as good as Michigan's, but a team that I would not want to face in the tournament. They've got 5 guys, including Jay Huff and Sam Hauser, who can score. They can shoot from 3. Tony Bennett is an outstanding coach. As somebody who is getting into coaching, one of the things that I've kind of watched with him is he'll be critical, but not to the point where he's insulting his players. He brings it back. He highlights what they're doing well, but also when they're not giving the effort that they need, he calls them out on it. So I just think this UVA team certainly poised to make another run at a national championship.
I don't have time, but I spent 40 minutes in a car with Tony Bennett once, and let me tell you something. Everything you said, he's just a remarkable person. And by the way, I keep having to remind, UVA is still the defending champion. I keep having to
That's
remind.
right.
George, what else is on your mind this week?
I was going to stick with the Wizards as we were just touching. I'm just curious. The Caps right now, I think they're not, they've been stopping and starting, but the Wizards, I think it's going to be interesting to see how they kind of pick up here, in their last 6, the way they've done. It's kind of interesting. The 3 wins, they've all come down to the end. And then the losses, they're winning right now without Russell Westbrook. And I know Russell Westbrook has said he needs to get his stuff together and start playing basketball. He knows it. And I think that it's going to be, when he does do that, I think this team could be, just because of everything else in the league, the team's having to start. You mentioned the Mavericks, you mentioned the Miami Heat. Yeah, you have your top tier up here, but look, they've obviously proven they can play when they decide to play and they want to play. They've beaten Brooklyn twice. They've been in other games. So I'm anxious to see how they kind of put all this together, with Bertans, Denny Avdia, these guys and Alex Len, how they're going to all kind of mesh here once they get some legs under them and once Russell starts playing the way that he knows he can play, and I think the way we all expect him to play.
And needs to play, quite frankly. Rob,
and Dave, does that have anything to do with him, taking these back-to-backs off? Do you think that's going to change throughout the year?
I think it will. No, it will. Yeah. Absolutely. And in fact, that was brought up after the Charlotte game because the wonderful nature of the Charlotte game, he didn't play that many minutes. And so it was not without out of possibility that he would have played Monday night in Chicago. As it turned out, he didn't. I think that is going to change. Rob, go ahead and bring us home.
Well, my non-Wizards related, because I think the Wizards are pretty fascinating at this point in time. But the quarterback carousel in the NFL, this thing is, we're the most quarterback turnover. This is on ESPN this morning. The most quarterback turnover we've seen in a single offseason was back in 1999, where you had 16 different new starting quarterbacks.
Wow.
Going into that season. That's half the league right there in turnover. And that could approach that this offseason. And it's not just, guys toward the bottom of the, rankings, for lack of a better term. These are big name quarterbacks that are going to be on the move this offseason. So it'll be interesting to see where those musical chairs, where everybody lands. I would put my money on Carson Wentz ending up in Indianapolis and reuniting with Frank Reich. I think that makes the most sense for him. And I'm sure by the end of this week, we'll know if it's there or Chicago. Those are the only 2 destinations that really make sense. And it'll be interesting to see if Washington gets involved. Like I said, I don't think that they're going to get involved based on Ron Rivera's comments and some of the stuff that I've heard over the weekend. But you know, this may be one of the most fascinating off seasons in NFL history, and that's saying something because they really are the ultimate soap opera, even in the off season.
Well, that's why they are number one among sports leagues. They
Amen.
keep it
That's right.
churning year round. Listen, guys, we're running out of time. We appreciate everybody's time watching us and enjoy the WTOP Huddle. For Rob Woodfork, George Wallace, Chris Cichon, Dave Preston, who had a sportscast to do. Wow, that full-time job always gets in the way. I'm Dave Johnson. Thanks for your time.
Break.